learning about a disturbing figure related to Detroit's foreclosure crisis. A new study has found that around 10,000 homes in the city were foreclosed on over a 5-year period because of bad tax assessments. 7 Action News reporter Simon Chowdhury shows us why many of the homeowners should never have been paying those taxes to begin with.
Foreclosure, that's a word all too familiar to many Detroiters. The Coalition to End Unconstitutional Tax Foreclosures is speaking out to say many of the foreclosures in the city for the past 10 years were unconstitutional.
What in the world is going on?
That's what Bernadette Atuhene wanted to find out. She says the state law caps a property tax increase at 50%.
We did a study that between 2009 and 2015, we found that in each of those 7 years, anywhere between 55 and 85% of properties were being assessed in violation of the Michigan Constitution.
She released her study this week. It says 95% of Detroiters with the lowest valued homes were being unjustly assessed, while only 13% of residents with the highest valued homes were. She says there's a reason for that.
When you have more education and you have more money to hire a lawyer, you're going to appeal your taxes. The poorest of the poor are precisely the people who didn't have the power or the knowledge to go and appeal.
She says this study shows the assessments were the primary cause of the foreclosures. Bernadette believes 25% of the homes sold for $8,000 or less would not have been foreclosed had it not been for the assessments. The city said they cannot comment on the study because they don't have the access to the raw data used or the methodology. But they did say if a homeowner finds their property taxes are too high, they can file an appeal. And if they qualify, they can apply for a poverty exemption, which means they don't have to pay at all.
They're not supposed to be paying these taxes in the first place, but due to several barriers erected by the city of Detroit, they didn't know about it or weren't able to apply for it.
There's an ongoing class action lawsuit against the city right now. If you believe your property taxes are too high, you can challenge the assessment. We have that information on our website. In Detroit, Simon Chowdhury, 7 Action News.
Wow, certainly good information to know. All right.
From 2011 to 2015, the Wayne County Treasurer foreclosed upon approximately 1 in 4 Detroit properties for non-payment of property taxes. Once the properties were foreclosed, many were left vacant, many were vandalized, and stripped of everything of value. These derelict properties lowered property values and caused anyone who could get out to flee. The property tax foreclosure crisis in Detroit has wiped out entire neighborhoods of Detroit's most vulnerable residents. Poor and working class black families have borne the brunt of this crisis, and it should not have happened. According to the Michigan Constitution, no property should be assessed at more than 50% of its market value. It turns out the city government systematically inflated the property tax assessments of homes in Detroit beyond this legal limit. In fact, between 2009 and 2015, 55 to 85% of Detroit properties were unconstitutionally assessed each year. This led to illegally inflated taxes on those properties. Why? Because in 2008, home values in Detroit plummeted as a result of the Great Recession. But instead of reducing property tax assessments to match the lower value of homes, the government robotically copied the previous rates, making only minor adjustments. It was no surprise that residents weren't able to pay. And here's the kicker. Many families were not supposed to be paying property taxes in the first place because they qualify for the Michigan poverty tax exemption. But Detroit didn't publicize this and made the application process so difficult that it was nearly impossible to complete. So when we look at the decimation that unconstitutional property tax assessments have left behind, who is to blame? Working and poor people who are struggling to provide a home for their families? Or the government, who systematically and illegally inflated the assessed values of homes to increase their property tax revenue, then seized homes from families when they could not afford to pay? Join our fight to end unconstitutional tax foreclosures in Detroit.
Foreclosure affected my home. It put a looming tension and doubt in the house. It took our happiness away for a second, a good amount of time. It's so heavy it damaged my health. It broke me a little, but I'm back now, and I'm ready now. This house sold for $3,750. I'm surprised it didn't sell for less. I think that my house is worth between $500 to $1,000. So the assessor says my house is worth $22,000. That is severely incorrect. When you go to buy a house, you look at not just the house, but the things surrounding your house, the neighborhood in general. Everything around us is falling apart. There are abandoned houses all down my block on each side. I need siding on the right side of my house. My roof has holes in it. The sewer system, the plumbing. We have a flood in the basement every time it rains, every time. Being illegally assessed makes me so angry. I knew it was wrong. I did not know it was in the Constitution, Michigan's Constitution, but I knew it wasn't right. Detroit is 80% black. It feels like the same type of injustice that is happening so many other places, whether it be getting pulled over because driving while black, any of those things, it's the same thing, just hidden better. I learned about the poverty tax exemption through hearsay. And I'm like, we have to be eligible for this. But everyone I asked about it at every one of these buildings in downtown Detroit either didn't know about it at all or sent me to one place that sent me to another, and I got nowhere. So it makes me angry, but at the same time, they started something. They don't know what they started, and we're about to finish it. Dear Mr. Mayor, come talk to us. This neighborhood they consider so bad. Come to the neighborhoods that are the hardest hit. I want to see the city of Detroit take responsibility. We're talking about over 100,000 people that lost their homes. We're not doing this to ourselves. This is not laziness. So I want to see people get help. I want help, but I want to see other people get help.
Hello, everybody. Hello, hello, hello. It's good to see everybody here. This is Professor Bernadette Atuahene coming to say hello and starting off our press conference. Many of you have been fighting with us for years. Many of you have been coming to our Coffee and Stories organizing monthly event on every first Saturday of the month. So I just want to thank you all for those of you who have been in this fight with us and are so consistent and consistently showing up, because it's with consistency that we are going to get to our wins and that we have been winning. So let me just give a brief summary of what we know. So number one, when I first started doing my work, I did a study that found that between 2009 and 2015, in each of those 7 years, anywhere between 55 and 85% of properties were being assessed in violation of the Michigan State Constitution, which quite clearly says no property can be assessed at more than 50% of its market value. And then when we broke up those properties, we found that the lowest valued properties, 95% or more, were being assessed in violation of the Michigan State Constitution. But then when we got to the highest valued properties, it was less than 20% of the properties that were being assessed in violation of the Michigan State Constitution. So we found that the lowest valued properties are the properties that are really dealing with this illegality. Now, no one is contesting the state data. And when Mayor Duggan came into office, he campaigned on the fact that he would get these property tax assessments correct. And when he got into office, for the first 2 years he was in office, he did 2 across the board property tax cuts. But when we have something called regressivity, that word is going to be used a lot today. And all that means is that lower valued homes are taxed at a higher rate than higher valued homes. And so when you have a situation where the lower valued homes are taxed at a higher rate than the higher valued homes, you don't need an across the board cut. What you need is a deep cut for the lowest valued homes, and either staying the same or actually an increase for the highest valued homes. But in the name of political expediency and, just to do something that was available, Mayor Duggan did the 2 across the board cuts. And we did a study and shows that those 2 across the board cuts did not fix the problem in Detroit of the systematic overtaxation. All right, so that's where we're at. And then we showed the study to the mayor, and the mayor says our study was wrong. Okay. So then we said, okay, if this is just a problem of you thinking our study is wrong, we asked the University of Chicago Center for Municipal Finance to do an independent study, because they do these studies all over the nation, to see what the story was. And their story came up saying the same thing. Lower valued homes in Detroit are still being assessed in violation of the Michigan State Constitution. And then we went back to the Duggan administration, and the Duggan administration said, well, the University of Chicago study is wrong. We said, okay, if you believe that study is wrong, then do your own study and show us what your study says. They refused to do that. All right, next step. We said, all right, if you think the University of Chicago is wrong, then we will get other academics, equally neutral academics, to evaluate the study. We got academics from Duke University. We got academics from UVA who examined the University of Chicago study and found that, in fact, what everyone knows, that the lower valued homes in Detroit are still being overtaxed. Okay? And they've done 3 different studies showing the same thing. But the Duggan administration still says, oh, their study is wrong, without producing its own study. So the point is, if you want to fix a problem, the first thing you have to do is acknowledge that the problem exists. But the Duggan administration refuses to acknowledge that the problem exists, despite study after study from reputable institution after institution. So the fighters of the Coalition for Property Tax Justice, who call themselves the Homekeeper Warriors, then they got to work, and they passed something called the Property Tax Reform Ordinance and it came into effect of January of last year. Our director of programs, Mike is going to talk to you more about the property tax reform ordinance. But one of the key features of the property tax reform ordinance is it forces the city to do its own study so that they can stop saying everyone else's study is wrong. Do your own study. And that way we can see, because what it's called an assessment ratio study. And that's the only way we will know if Detroit is still overtaxing its homeowners. So through hell and high water, through 3 years of organizing, because of you all, many of the fighters who, again, have been fighting alongside the coalition for years now, we passed the property tax reform ordinance. And the city had to do its own study, finally. Do you think the city did the study on time? Absolutely not. One whole year passed and the study wasn't done. But the good news is we just got the study last week or the week before last. We recently finally got the study. Now it's not, oh, the University of Chicago, it's not Duke, it's not UVA. The city itself commissioned an assessment ratio study to find out if Detroiters are still being overtaxed. And that's what we're here to discuss today. And the news is what we all academics who have been doing this study knew what the news would be. Yes, the city is still overtaxing its residents, and the lower valued homes are still being taxed at a higher rate than the higher valued homes. But guess what? This time, the Duggan administration can't say that, oh, you guys are wrong, because this study was commissioned and came from the city itself. So hopefully now that this question about whether overtaxation is still in existence, it's squashed, we can begin the hard work of now fixing the problem once we acknowledge that the problem exists. I do want to read for you a statement. We're going to have another data science later in the program, but I just want to start this program by reading a statement by the University of Chicago Center for Municipal Finance, who has been doing these neutral, unbiased studies for us for at least the past 3 years. And they read the study. If the team can put the study in the chat so that you all have access to the study. And the study was done by an organization called the IAAO, the International Assessing Officers Organization. It's the national organization, the international organization it's the main professional organization for assessing. And they're the ones who did the study. Very reputable, very neutral organization. And University of Chicago statement reads as follows. The IAAO confirms that the University of Chicago studies have been saying for years. Assessments in Detroit still do not meet industry standards and are regressive, with lower valued properties assessed at a higher rate than higher valued properties. The assessor has typically responded to our research by arguing incorrectly that it fails to account for neighborhood conditions. But the IAAO study contradicts that argument as well. The study found that 84% of neighborhoods did not meet the industry standard for uniformity, which is called the COD, the coefficient for dispersion, and 86% of neighborhoods did not meet the industry standard for regressivity, which is called the PRD, the price-related differential. Simply put, assessments are still unfair in Detroit. That's a statement from the University of Chicago Center for Municipal Finance. And if you can, Ebony, put that statement directly in the chat so folks have the University of Chicago statement. You'll find it in your email, Ebony. All right. All right. So that's what we're here to talk about. But what we want to start is really for those of you who are unfamiliar with the property tax reform ordinance. Michael Hart, again, he's our director of projects for the coalition. He is going to talk to us about the property tax reform ordinance. Mike was born and raised on Detroit's East Side and started working for the coalition in part because his family experiences property tax injustice. Mike?
Yeah, thank you, Professor Atuhane, for that introduction. So exactly as you said, I am going to go through and talk through the property tax reform ordinance for anyone who may not be familiar with it. So there are 5 reforms that I want to talk through specifically because The ordinance did a lot. We know that there were tremendous issues with the way that the city of Detroit was assessing Detroiters and their property taxes and just administering their property tax system as well. So the first reform to discuss is the optional assessor's review. So prior to the ordinance being passed, Detroit had the most archaic property tax appeal process in the state of Michigan. So of course, as with every other city in the state of Michigan, when you get your assessment notice at the end of January or early February, there's generally information on it that tells you how to appeal that assessment. Whereas most cities in the state of Michigan have only one step to their appeal process, just, the Board of Review, the city of Detroit had two steps. They required that Detroiters went to the Board of Assessors and then got a decision there, and then appealed to the Board of Review. So there was undue burden on Detroiters compared to other cities in the state of Michigan. And this also gave Detroiters less time to appeal their property tax assessments because, as I said, you get your property tax assessment notice from the city of Detroit end of January, early February, and the old deadline for the Board of Assessors was February 15th. So you may have only had a couple weeks to appeal. There were a couple years where, people were getting their notices, with only a couple days to appeal. And so the ordinance made it so that the effective deadline for filing that appeal is the first Monday in March because there is only one board that Detroiters have to appeal through. The second reform of the ordinance was approving the assessment notices. So as we all know, property tax information is very, very complex. There are these terms like market value, assessed value, taxable value, and they all have these complex relationships with each other. And previously, before the ordinance, the assessment notices didn't include any definitions or information that allowed people to understand their assessment notices. And so a big part of the ordinance was altering the assessment notices to provide these definitions. Also providing other information like an improved frequently asked questions page and ensuring that the language overall in the assessment notices conforms to what the ordinance required. So as I said, the first reform of the ordinance was altering how the process works. And so we wanted to ensure that the change to the process was reflected in the assessment notice too, so that when people receive the assessment notice, they know that they can just go to the Board of Review and have one appeal step rather than be confused with the assessor's review. The third reform to discuss is improving the Board of Review determination letters. So, of course, you appeal to the Board of Review now by the first Monday in March, and then you get your decision back through a determination letter. Prior to the ordinance, there was no obligation for the city to provide substantive information on why appeals were granted or denied. And this was a tremendous issue because you have the right to, when you receive that notice from the Board of Review, to appeal again to the Michigan Tax Tribunal. And so when people didn't know, why their appeal was granted or denied, that made it very difficult for them to appeal the Board of Review's decision because they didn't know what to change in their appeal at the next stage. It's also important to note, too, that there are still tremendous issues with the way that the city of Detroit is administering the property tax, the property tax appeal process, the property tax assessment process, and specific to the determination letters, because the Coalition for Property Tax Justice manages its own property tax appeals project to help Detroiters file free property tax appeals, we have a really good inside look on what's happening each year in this appeal process. And so last year, for instance, even though there was this requirement in place for a clear reason to be provided on determination letters of why appeals were granted or denied, we had 180 of our clients receive letters that had incorrect information on it. Some of them didn't provide reasons. Some of the reasons made no sense. And so there are still issues, even post-ordinance, to the way that this property tax appeal process is administered. The fourth reform was requiring that the city release all of its assessment data by February 1st of each year. So this is very important because, as Professor Atuahene said at the beginning, our whole movement was founded, and really we were able to prove the issues with Detroit's property tax assessments because we analyzed the assessment data. So this assessment data needs to be accessible to third parties, to Detroit residents to maybe view it themselves, for multiple properties they have, or view what their neighbor's assessment data is like. And so we wanted to make sure that this was clearly stipulated and that this is done every year by February 1st. Also important to note too that this was not done by February 1st this year. It took a few extra days to get that assessment data. So again, there are tremendous issues with how this ordinance is being adhered to by the city of Detroit. And then the final reform is allowing city council to intervene on, when they know that Detroiters are being overassessed in a systemic fashion. So the first component of this is providing more oversight of Detroit's assessment roles. So, I mentioned earlier that the assessment data needs to be accessible to third parties by February 1st of each year so that they can analyze it. But it's also equally, if not more important, that the city of Detroit is analyzing its own data. So this requirement makes it so that Detroit City Council has to contract an independent review of the city's assessment data and provide it by February 15th of each year. And it's very important to note, as Professor Atuahene said, that this is absolutely not being adhered to. And this is being adhered to in the worst fashion of all the reforms that we mentioned, because, the study that was required to be done by February 15th of 2024, we just received this month. So that study was done 14 months late, which, is a tremendous problem because this prevented Detroiters from seeing the issues, from their own city rather than from third parties about, how they're being overassessed and how the overassessment or how the assessment process needs to be altered. And then finally, this fifth reform was about allowing city council to send assessments to the Board of Review for reconsideration in bulk. And this is in line with the coalition's philosophy that, the burden should be put on the city of Detroit to fix its own assessments. The burden should not be put on Detroit homeowners to appeal their property tax assessments to the Board of Review. So this solution through the property tax reform ordinance, allows that to happen because city council can say, we have this information about, Detroiters being overassessed from this most recent assessment data. Instead of making it so that each of those homeowners has to appeal individually, we can send those homeowners in bulk to the Board of Review so that all those appeals are done more efficiently and with less issues for Detroiters. So I'm going to pass it back to Professor Atuahene. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mike. Thank you so much. All right, I want to first encourage everybody, if you have any questions or comments, go ahead and put those questions or comments in the chat. This is meant to be, and at the end of this program, we're going to answer all the questions, number one. Number two, if you're here as a member of the press, you can identify yourself in your name label so that we can call on you as well, right? If you're a member of the press, please identify yourself. All right, now going with the property tax reform ordinance, just continuing on what Michael was saying, again, just to emphasize two major problems. Okay? Number one is city council passed an ordinance that it is not enforcing. Let me say that again. City council passed an ordinance that it is not enforcing because the property tax reform ordinance has some very specific requirements about how your assessment notices are to be displayed, right? We did a lot of research and basically we want these things to be understandable to people. When you get your property tax assessment notice in January, we want people, regular people, to be able to look at it and understand what in the world is going on. And so that was one of the big areas of reform. But to this day, those property tax assessment notices are not in compliance with the property tax reform ordinance, and city council has done nothing about it, number one. Number two, as Mike said, this study is really the main kind of big punch of the property tax reform ordinance, because once we find that is unfair taxation, once we find that the lower valued homes are taxed at a higher rate than the higher valued homes, the ordinance gives city council the power to say, all right, if the majority of homes that are being assessed under, let's say, $50,000 are in violation of the Michigan State Constitution, then city council can require the board of review to take a second look at all homes worth $50,000 and under to make sure that Detroiters are not being overassessed. But since the study was late, right, we couldn't do that in the first year that the reform ordinance was passed, and year two, because the study came out after the March Board of Review had closed, city council had no opportunity to do something about these overassessments for the second year in a row. And that's because the Duggan administration drug its feet in producing this study. Okay. So, and again, the city council allowed the Duggan administration to drag its feet in producing this. They did not hold the Duggan administration accountable. All right, so that's where we stand right now. We passed a very powerful piece of legislation called the Property Tax Reform Ordinance, and it is currently only being implemented in part, and some of the most important parts are not being implemented. City Council passed an ordinance that it is not ensuring its implementation. That's the situation we find ourselves in. All right, now what I want to do is keep the program moving. And I want us to really talk about this study that the city produced. All right. So we have with us Robert Ross. And Robert was the inaugural chief data officer for Cook County's assessor's office between 2018 and 2021. During that time, he built a state-of-the-art data science team. Previously, he worked with the Chicago Tribune to expose inequality in the property tax assessments in a series called The Tax Divide, which was a Pulitzer-nominated series in the Chicago Tribune. He holds 2 master's degrees in economics and public policy, and previously he worked for Chicago Public Schools, Cook County, the University of Chicago, and the Taxpayers Federation of Illinois. Rob is currently building another data science team for Maryland's Transit Administration, and we are beyond excited to have Rob Ross with us today to really break down what the study that the city commissioned from the IAAO, what it says and what it means. Rob, again, thank you for coming.
Thank you, Professor. Thanks for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here and talk property taxes, which a lot of people often find is a bit of a dry topic, but I get really excited about it. So I'm going to start out. That was a great introduction. I was going to introduce my background, but that's been done. I'm going to talk a little bit about this study. I read the study. The IAAO is a very reliable organization, and so I have no doubt that the study was executed well. There's one big takeaway from the study, which is that the current property tax system in Detroit is imprecise, inaccurate, and unfair. That's the takeaway from the study. And let's think about a little bit about what that means. If the Detroit assessor is throwing darts at a board and the bullseye is a perfect assessment, if you walked in, you'd find that there are darts all over the wall. There's some darts in the floor, and there's darts in the ceiling. The assessments are very, very imprecise. Very few darts are actually in the bullseye itself. What's more, the darts typically land lower than the bullseye. So the assessor typically under-assesses properties, except for those properties that are at their lowest end of the price spectrum. Those properties are consistently over-assessed. So if you have 2 houses, they're the same size, same condition, and same value. In a fair system, they should be taxed at the same rate. But in Detroit, one might be assessed like it's worth a fraction of the other one, especially if those 2 houses are in different neighborhoods. And that's what this study shows. So the study says that the COD is 37%. The top bound for the COD, the highest COD that's acceptable in the industry, is 20%. So 37% is almost twice the upper limit of acceptability. That says that so that just says that the assessments are very, very imprecise. They're all over the darts are all over the place. The second thing is that the system is biased against lower value homes. So if you look at the study, the thing that you're going to want to look at is there's a chart in here. There's a chart in here, I believe it's chart 3, that looks like a hockey stick, where you've got all these dots at the top left of the chart, and then they come down and then they spread out to the right. And that basically shows us that if your property is worth less than about $100,000 or less, the assessor is going to overvalue it, and in some cases overvalue it by a lot. The statistic that shows that is your PRD, which in this study was 1.14, which again is well outside the bounds of what the industry considers acceptable for unfairness. The PRD is the measure of unfairness. Your ideal PRD is exactly 1, but this study shows that the PRD is well outside. It's far too high. Finally, I would point out that, to give you an example of that, there's the wealthiest neighborhood in Detroit is assessed considerably lower than the 50% target, right? And so I don't know which neighborhood this was because they use a serial identifier rather than like your traditional neighborhood name. But the wealthiest, the neighborhood with the highest value homes was assessed at an average of 37% of market value. And now remember that their statutory target is 50% and their average is 45%. But the richest homes, they get even lower at 37%. And so the result of that is that lower value homes and lower value neighborhoods pick up the difference in the tax bill. And I would also point out that, as I said, the IAAO is a very credible organization. However, the IAAO was also contracted by Detroit, and they will not be as aggressive as I would have been at testing the validity of the Detroit's assessors' numbers. Assessors can juke their stats. Assessors can take steps to make their performance look better than it would otherwise look. One way of doing this is by manipulating what they consider to be a valid sale. The IAAO notes that the assessor's office does in fact do this. They arbitrarily remove certain sales from their sample before they run their sales ratio statistics. And without knowing what those sales were, we can't say for sure whether that would make them look better. But it's a good way for an assessor's office to make themselves look better. And another way they can do it is by doing something called selective reappraisal. And to understand selective reappraisal, it's as if the assessor takes the test, grades themselves, and then goes back through the test and changes all the answers that they got wrong to the right answer. That's what selective reappraisal is. And you can test for that, but the IAAO study did not test for that because it's not part of the standard battery of tests the IAAO uses. My point here is that this test, this study, is actually very nice to the assessor. It's very generous to the assessor. And so when the study says that the assessor has failed to meet every single standard, industry standard, they're saying that even under the most favorable conditions that they could have given the assessor, they softballed it, and the assessor still whiffed it. And so just to round out my comments, I feel a little bit of deja vu because in Cook County, Illinois, which is where Chicago is, in 2017, we had the same. In 2016, we said the same thing. The assessments are bad. And then the county board said, well, we have to have an independent verification. And in 2017, we had that independent verification. A study just like this one said, yes, indeed, the assessments are very bad. They're very unfair. They're imprecise. They're inaccurate. In 2018, Fritz Kagi won. The voters of Cook County said, we're done with the bad assessments. We got to get somebody in here who knows what they're doing, and they elected Fritz Kagi. And so I hope that this independent study produces the same kind of civic reform that it did in Cook County. That's all I have to say about that.
Excellent. Rob, again, thank you for joining us for this press conference and community meeting. Your insights are extremely valuable. All right, next we're going to move on because you know here at the Coalition, we are about action, okay? And so if we have empirically proven data that these over assessments continue, then it makes no sense and it is completely unjust and evil for the Wayne County Treasurer to foreclose on homes that we have evidence are being assessed in violation of the Michigan State Constitution. Thank God, since 2020, we have been able to convince Wayne County Treasurer Eric Sabree to put a moratorium on owner-occupied homes when the University of Chicago studies showed that a certain class of homes were being overassessed. One year it was homes worth $40,000 and under, et cetera. So since 2020, Eric Sabree has agreed to put a moratorium on foreclosing on the homes again, where the evidence shows that the majority of these particular homes are being assessed in violation of the Michigan State Constitution. We again, in 2025, are calling on Eric Sabree to do the morally right thing, which is not to foreclose on owner-occupied homes under $50,000, because that's what the University of Chicago study, backed up by this new study by the city, shows these homes are still being systematically over-assessed, okay? So here, I want to introduce one of our leaders, Alex Nichols, to really come and talk to us about the action, because every time, you know, everyone who's been with us for a while knows that anytime we do an event, we do an action. We're not just a talk shop. We're about taking action, and we've gotten tremendous results. So Alex Nichols is a Detroit resident who grew up with her 9 siblings in their family home. In 2006, Alex's mother passed away, leaving Alex as the listed owner on the deed. At the time, she was in graduate school in California. Despite having proof of property tax exemptions and payments, her home ended up on the foreclosure list in 2014, and she lost her legacy. She has been a leader and a community advocate with the Coalition for Property Tax Justice ever since, fighting to make sure that no other Detroiter has to go through what she went through. Alex will now join us again to introduce the action that we all are going to take right now. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. Listen, we have a chance right now to let our voices be heard through our letter writing campaign. Treasurer Sabree plans to foreclose on hundreds of Detroiters, despite the city council's demands that he halt foreclosures for overassessed homes. For the past 4 years, the coalition has successfully demanded Sabree halt foreclosures of the owner-occupied homes, but now we need your help. Will you write to Treasurer Sabree and demand that he stop all foreclosures of owner-occupied homes again this year? We need your action. We need your action. This is how we come together once a month, the first Saturday of every month, to come and just commune with each other, be in community with each other, tell our stories with one another. And we see the faces of those who are taking action, that respond to the emails, that meet city council at their meetings, that go out to different organizations and give information to the community about how they can apply for the HOPE exemption and how they can get help through Wayne Metro and other services. And these are things that we do once every month. And I'll just say, I have to start probably with my story at the end, where for you guys, this is the part where I'm completely devastated, completely depressed, completely out of touch with anything and everything, because the Detroit Land Bank changed the locks on my home when I returned from California. After having an exemption, after showing proof that I had the HOPE exemption, which the lady in the office didn't want to tell me about. She whispered it to me. You know, you're eligible. I'm like, yeah. I gave her my student ID. I gave her my income. I showed her the payments I've been making already on the house in terms of taxes. And it just became, like you guys heard in the opening segment, you get sent to one office, from one office to the next, from one office to the next, not getting any help. And I asked the UCHC to assist me with this while I was out of state, and I had a contract with them, but they let my contract slip through the cracks. They let my home get listed as blight. My home is in Russell Woods, a historic district in Detroit. My home was not blight. I had 2 roll-off dumpsters full of debris removed from my home. I cleaned my home out, preparing for me and my sons to move back to Detroit and move into this house. But instead, I met with locks changed. UCHC said they can't help me, threw their hands up and said the land bank is its own entity in 2015. And even though I was able to get meetings with the land bank and get to the door of Eric Sabri, the door was still shut in my face. I gave them packet after packet of my information. I guess they threw it away, proving my exempt status, proving my disability status. My dad was a City of Detroit sanitation worker. My mother worked for the City of Detroit as a school teacher. I worked for the City of Detroit as a school educator. And I was even eligible for 50% off the sale of the home, of which I was going to buy again through the land bank. But when I went in there to sign up and bid for my home, they had already had it up for bid the day before. But that's not what the paper said. I looked on there, went down there. My home was not in the land bank bidding. Another year went by. My home is back in the land bank bidding. And I tried to stop it again. Again and again, the people at the land bank kept refusing to review my documents. But I didn't stop. I kept going. I kept going. I kept calling and kept calling until I met someone who said, you're not alone. There's a community of us meeting for call to actions to make the illegal foreclosure stop. And I had no idea that there were other people out here like that for me. Everywhere I went, the ACLU said, oh, we're done with our portion of compensation for people or helping folks. Went back to the UCHC to see if they could help me with their Forever Home Detroit, whatever program. They never called me. They never reached out to see if I was homeless or needed any assistance after they let my contract fall through the cracks. They were supposed to bid for my home back. I gave them money to bid for my home back in the auction, but they didn't. I find out my home had been cherry picked because I was out of state. Because of whatever reasons, they wanted my property. And in my opinion, my property will be returned back to me. This is what I'm fighting for. Yes, we want compensation. Yes, dignity must be restored to all Detroiters. But I really need to see the needle move for us who have been hardest hit. I was homeless, staying with my family from house to house, saying, why should I be purchasing another home when I have a home? I just felt like a failure to my siblings, to the memory of my parents' death, to my children. It wasn't until I attended these monthly meetings with the coalition that the baggage started to fade away, and I could tell my story without crying like I am here today. And I still get choked up sometimes because that's my father's home. He sent all 10 of us to college from that home. It's my father's home, and I want it back. Now, you guys have to do a call to action with this letter. We have to be as one in Detroit. This is the Detroit I know. When we come to get together every first Saturday of the month, that's the Detroit that I know. I know Detroiters helping one another, passing information on to each other, not letting each other falter because we don't know how to read a letter. I have a master's degree, advanced degrees. I can't imagine how someone with the high school or middle school education could navigate this process. It's just, this is why I'm in the fight, and I'm going to stay in the fight. And we're so happy to be communicating with one another the way we know Detroiters can do, the old time Detroit, when we care. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much, Alex, for those powerful words and for your testimony. Okay, thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, now I want to emphasize everyone, again, this is about business. Take the action. The link is in the chat. Click the link and send the letter to Eric Sabri, letting him know you want him not to foreclose on these lower valued homes, which every study, the studies from University of Chicago and the study the city recently commissioned from the IAAO says these homes are still being overassessed. Click the link and send Eric Sabri a letter demanding that he don't take these homes through tax foreclosure. We have layers and layers of evidence that these homes were being unfairly assessed. So he should not take them through tax foreclosure. Again, take the action, click the link. And these actions that we have, it works, y'all. The Coalition for Property Tax Justice, we are winning, y'all. Just so you know, we have halted roughly 13,000 tax foreclosures by pressuring Wayne County Treasurer to place a moratorium on owner-occupied homes in 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, and today we're fighting to make sure the same thing happens in 2025. And with your help, if you take action, you guys have been taking action, that's how we're going to make sure that this moratorium, again, keeps going in 2025. We've helped, as a coalition, over 1,000 Detroit homeowners successfully apply for a total of $4.4 million in federal ARPA funding to pay their illegally inflated property tax debt through the MyHalf program that came with that COVID funding. Because of the hard work of all of the fighters that fight alongside us, we have appealed the inflated property tax assessments for over 1,000 Detroit homeowners free of charge. As a coalition, we have secured $6 million from the city of Detroit for compensation. Okay, we ain't out here playing, y'all. We are out here getting results. And the only reason we get results is because you all fight alongside of us. And when we make a call for an action, you all consistently show up and take the action. So I want to thank each and every one of you who's been in this fight. And I want you to send this letter. And I hope to be sending an email soon celebrating the fact that Eric Sabri has agreed to continue the moratorium for 2025. Okay, now is the time in the program for questions. We're going to start with reporters. If there's any reporters in the room, please identify yourself. Make sure your label is identified with your name and your station, and then go ahead and raise your hand so our virtual producer can see you and you can ask your question. While we're waiting for the reporters to get themselves together and get their hands up and get their questions together, we have several questions already in the chat from community. I'll take the first question from Anthony Adams. Hello, Mr. Adams. He says, is it a difference between a tax bill or an assessment? Absolutely. What I want you guys to know is what you get in January is called a property tax assessment. That's when the city comes in and says, hey, I think your house is valued worth X. Okay. So they might say, I think your house is worth $50,000, let's say, for an example. And that's what you find out in your assessment bill. So in Michigan, the assessed value is half of your market value. So if the city says your market value is worth $50,000, then your assessment by the Michigan State Constitution can be no more than $25,000. Okay. So The point is when you get your assessment notice and you look at the market value, you just, the assessed value times 2 gets you to your market value. So if you look at that statement that comes in January and it says your assessed value is $25,000, you times that by 2 and you can understand that the market value is worth $50,000. If you go, my house can't sell for no $50,000, that's when you file an appeal. And you contact us at the coalition. And if you are an owner occupier, meaning if you're not a landlord, if you actually live in the house, then we will file that appeal for you for free. We will go and do the research and figure out if your house is being overassessed. And if it is, we will file that appeal for free. Okay, so it's only after you first get your assessment notice that later you get your property tax bill. Okay, which in Detroit comes in 2 parts. So that's the answer to the first question. I see another question here in the chat. Mike, you want to talk about the over taxation? So about the program, I'll start it and then you finish it, Mike. So essentially, another question is people are asking about the refund. So as many of you know, the state of Michigan was up to some shenanigans, okay? So what do I mean by that? Okay, what happened is if someone owed $50,000 worth of taxes, right? They had a $50,000 tax debt, but the Wayne County treasurer sold their home at auction for $100,000. That extra $50,000, they were supposed to give it back to the homeowner, but instead they kept it. First, the Michigan Supreme Court said that that was illegal. And then the United States Supreme Court came behind the Michigan Supreme Court in a case called Hennepin to say that it's absolutely illegal to sell it for $100,000 and you only had a $50,000 tax debt and not to give the homeowner their money back. And so there's a process that was put in place that had initially a deadline of March 31st for people to file the paperwork to get the refund. And that deadline was then extended, I believe, Mike, to April 6th. But Mike, you want to talk a little bit more about the refund?
Yes, absolutely. So you did a great job of, providing an overview, Professor Atuahene, and it's important to know that if you were in the position to, potentially get a refund, if you were foreclosed on in the past 15 or so years by the city of Detroit or Wayne County, you did not file the notice of intents claim, which is the notice that you had to file in order for the county to know that you wanted this refund, and in order for them to send it to you, we may still be able to help you with that. I'm going to put the number again in our chat that you should call if you were foreclosed on in the past 15 years, but you did not yet file that notice with the county or with another organization to get that money back.
Excellent, excellent. All right, we have another question here. Miss Yakita is asking, basically, how are these assessments so high when, when the neighborhood looks like it looks? And essentially, that's what we're talking about here. Is there's lots of things that affect your market value, which again, of your home. So it really depends on what the other homes in your neighborhood are selling for. And again, if you're living in an area with a lot of crime, a lot of abandoned homes, empty lots, then your home will sell for less, and that needs to be reflected. But what's going on in Detroit is these homes the home is really worth $25,000, and the city is saying it's worth $50,000, which makes the property taxes that you ultimately pay double of what they need to be. And so that's precisely the issue that we are here trying to address. All right, I think I got all of the questions. Ebony, are there any other more questions that you need to put here in the, okay, so here we have Luella asking a question. Somehow that didn't make it to the sheet, Ebony. Luella asked a question. She's saying, can we sue them for Michigan over assessing lower valued homes? And y'all, I really want to talk about this, all right? So we already tried to do this lawsuit. It is a case called, what's the case name, Mike? I'm just blanking.
Morningside
Oh
versus
Lord,
Sabree.
Morningside, y'all. That's my old lady brain working. It's a case called Morningside. And there we had the dream team of legal representation. We had the NAAC Legal Defense Fund. We had the ACLU of Michigan. And for the deep pockets, we had Covington and Burling, a firm, a prestigious firm in Washington, D.C. They brought two claims. One was a claim against the city of Detroit for obstructive administration of the property tax exemption. So, you know, one part, although we had all these people, again, since 2009, 1 in 3 people have lost their homes for failure to pay property taxes that they weren't supposed to pay in the first place, because over 40% of Detroiters live below the poverty line and qualify for something called the poverty tax exemption. But the city erected so many barriers that many people could not access this entitlement. And again, over 30,000 people lost their homes for property taxes they weren't supposed to be paying in the first place. So part of what the class action litigation did is it forced the part against Detroit settled, and it forced the city of Detroit to clean up its act and to make the property tax exemption accessible. The second part of the case was against Wayne County. And that second part of the case was against Wayne County for a violation of the Fair Housing Act. Because we know that the majority Black cities, Detroit, Inkster, and Highland Park and Wayne County, were being subjected to unconstitutional tax assessments and foreclosures at a greater rate than the majority white cities, right? In Wayne County, there are 43 municipalities. 33 have a supermajority of white people, 70% or more, and 3 have a supermajority of Black people, Detroit, Inkster, and Highland Park. So we find that the Black cities are experiencing foreclosure at a far greater rate, illegality. And so that's what the case was about. It went to Judge Colombo. Judge Colombo said, you brought it to, first of all, they tried to bring it to the federal court, because anyone who does litigation on civil rights know that you want to be in federal court. But there's something called the Tax Injunction Act, which prevented them from going to the federal courts, right? Any issue of state level tax collection has to be dealt with in state court. So they went to state court, and Judge Colombo says that you brought it to the wrong court. You should have gone to the Michigan Tax Tribunal. It went on appeal court agreed with Judge Colombo. It went to the Michigan Supreme Court denied cert, meaning the lower court decision stood. And that lower court decision saying you had to bring it to the Michigan Tax Tribunal killed the case for 3 reasons. Number one, the Michigan Tax Tribunal is not a court, it's an administrative agency. So they can't do what we wanted them to do, which is to issue an injunction, which is when the court tells people to do something or not to do something. Again, because the Michigan Tax Tribunal is an administrative agency and not a court, they also have no class action proceedings. So you have to bring cases one by one by one. There's no way to deal with systemic inequality in the state of Michigan, because the Michigan Tax Tribunal doesn't have a class action facility. So you literally have to bring it case by case. And the third reason why this procedural decision kills the case is because of the statute of limitations. At that point, to get to the tribunal, you had to file a case between February 1st and February 15th. But the Fair Housing Act gives you 2 years to file a case. So yes, we tried, of course, I'm a law professor. So the first thing we tried is to deal with this through the law, but the law let us down. There were certain procedures. So although we have all this uncontested data that shows these homes are being systematically overassessed, because of these procedural barriers that I'm enumerating for you, we have not been able, no court to this day has looked at this systematic data because of these procedural barriers. So that's why we formed the Coalition for Property Tax Justice, to find political solutions, since the law and legal institutions have let us down. All right, we are out of time. But I do want us to look at we prepared a report card. Mike, if you can make that report card live, I'd appreciate it. And walk them through the report card, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. Is this viewable?
Yes, we can see it.
Excellent. So yeah, this is our property tax justice report card. We put this together because this is, of course, a municipal election year in Detroit. And so we thought that it was very important to educate all Detroiters on, whether their city council members are upholding property tax justice and, taking actionable steps to reduce property tax injustice. So we discussed the property tax reform ordinance earlier in this presentation. So that is the first category, the green check for yes, they voted for the property tax reform ordinance, which has really helped, make the property tax appeal process easier for Detroiters and is helping Detroiters stay in the homes that they own. The X, of course, is no, they did not vote for the property tax reform ordinance. The second category that we have is did their Board of Review nominee follow the law? As part of the property tax reform ordinance, we, made it so that all of the people who sit on the Board of Review, which is the administrative body that hears assessment appeals and decides whether or not to grant them, must go through state testing so that they know what they're doing in that, sitting on that board and listening to those appeals, which is incredibly important because if you don't have people who are educated, they're not going to make the right decisions and they're not going to, grant the appeals properly. The third category is, did the city council member ensure that the Duggan administration produced a timely independent evaluator study? This was directly under the Reform 4 that we discussed earlier of the property tax reform ordinance. So, the property tax reform ordinance required that this study is produced by February 15th of each year that shows whether or not the city of Detroit's assessments are being properly administered and that, the city of Detroit is not over-assessing its own residents. As we said, this was not done in 2024 or in 2025. We just received the study for 2024 last month, even though it was supposed to be provided by February 15th, 2024. So all city council members got a no for this because none of them ensured that the Duggan administration produced a timely study. And the final category is, did the city council members ensure that the city of Detroit's property tax assessment notice follows the law? So similar with what we discussed, the ordinance made it so that these assessment notices need to explain in more depth what all the numbers on the assessment notices mean because they're incredibly complex. You have the taxable value, the assessed value, and we found that that has not been upheld. Even though it was part of the ordinance, it is now part of city law. So I'm going to scroll through this just so that you can see where all the city council members stand. But those are the four categories. And then there is additional textual explanation at the end as well.
Wonderful. And let's make sure to put this report card in the chat so people have access to it and can
Absolutely.
spread the word about how each of the council members are doing with respect to property tax justice in Detroit. All right. So we are coming to a close here. I just want, first of all, I'm very disappointed that the Detroit Free Press and the Detroit News are not here today to hear this very important news about this report, again, squashing this issue about overassessments. The city of Detroit's own report that it commissioned confirmed overassessments continue. But despite my disappointment with the Detroit News and Detroit Free Press not being here, I am overjoyed that so many of you showed up and continue to show up for property tax justice. And that is why we are winning, and we are going to get to the bottom of this issue. A lot of people start one issue and then they lose attention and go somewhere else. No, the coalition has been at this doggedly since 2017, and we will not stop until property tax justice is a reality in Detroit and actually throughout the nation, because this is a national problem. A national study shows that Blacks and Hispanics on average pay a 10 to 13% higher property tax rate than whites for the same bundle of goods, which equals $300 to $400 more per year. So this is a national racial justice issue that our nation has not yet begun to address. And Detroit is ground zero, being this 80% Black city. Detroit is ground zero for this national problem. And what brings me hope and what gives me life is not that Detroit is ground zero for the problem, but Detroit is ground zero for the resistance, y'all. Detroit is ground zero for the fight back. Because I always like to say those who are closest to the problems are also closest to the solution. So Detroit is leading the way in terms of solutions to this property tax injustice, which is a national issue. And I could not be more proud to fight alongside of each and every one of you. All right, y'all, love you so much. Thank all of our speakers for joining us, and get the word out. You guys have all the links in the chat. Get the word out about the study. We'll send you a link to this press conference so that you can send the link to family, to friends, to your political representatives. Let's get the word out. Let's not let them bury this IAAO study. Let's not let them bury this study showing that these assessments are still unfair in Detroit. Bye, everyone.